Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are back. So, did you miss us? I'm sure you did. I mean, who doesn't want to listen to amazing stories of innovators and service design practitioners all over the globe, just solving problems and changing the world one design challenge at a time? So, we're super excited to continue our Community Voices series this year. And it's all thanks to your incredible support and participation and love. And I am Sadeshna, your favorite host and SDN Ambassador, and I'm thrilled to continue this series with you. So, let's talk about our guest today. So, we actually have a very special guest to kick off the 2026 series. Our very own ambassador, Felipe, who's the founder of Arte Design Studio. And for those of you who have been following us from the beginning, know that he was a Community Voices host. In fact, he started this series, and this is an incredible full circle moment for us. And before we dive in, let me just tell you, drop in the chat where you're joining from and whatever questions you have, because at the end of the conversation, we're going to have a Q&A session and we'll be taking all your questions at that time. So, to hear more stories from the storyteller who brought together countless people to share their service design journey, let's bring on stage Felipe.
Hey, welcome to. I'm happy to be back. I was going to be welcome. I'm stuck with the original script. Sorry. Yeah, I'm happy to be back. Thank you, Sadeshna, for inviting me.
All habits die hard. I can see you wanted to also chime in and do some welcome. So, what does it feel like to be back on Community
It's your
Voices
stage. Your stage.
today?
I'm just here as a guest this time.
Amazing. What does it feel like to be back on the series as a guest this time?
I mean, I think we started talking about it a little bit when we were redoing the series and everything, and I thought it was a cool idea. Also, happy to say that it was not my idea; it wasn't me that I wanted to be like a guest. But no, it just I think it's good, and I'm happy that this kind of resonated with people, and other people are tuning in and keeping to hearing our stories.
Definitely. I think we all were curious about, because you've made so many people share their stories. We were curious about your story and where you started service design from. How did you dive into this world, became a part of SDN? So maybe you should tell us about your journey.
Yeah, I mean it's a long, maybe 10-year story at this point, but I mean, long story short, I started studying electrical engineering in Brazil right after I graduated from high school, but I realized quite not necessarily early on, but I realized after a couple of years studying that it was a bit too square to what I wanted to do. I always liked problem solving, I always liked different topics and interdisciplinarity and everything. So with my parents, we found design, and little by little, I started finding the different areas of design, so graphic, UX, service, and I really fell in love with service because of the human aspect of it, and really like the connections that it brings, and thinking about it from a systemic view and all of that. So I ended up doing a master's in service design, and after I graduated and after a short internship, I opened my own service design consultancy agency.
Is an incredible journey from engineering to actually opening your own consultancy. And how's that been like you for you? Like I think you have done that in the last year, and what has that transition looked like? Are you enjoying it? What was fun? What was challenging?
Yeah, I think it's been 1 year right now, kind of. I think I opened right in the beginning of February here in Sweden, where I live right now. And I think it's been definitely a roller coaster, ups and downs, and a lot of learnings in general, because being a solo entrepreneur, also you have to kind of figure out a lot of things by yourself. It's a different tax system, it's a different currency, it's a different way of working. In general, for me, starting right out of university was somewhat of a struggle to just convert clients and everything, because even talking with some of the guests from the Community Voices, they would say, yeah, my first client was somebody that I worked with before, and I don't have that baggage coming in when I started the studio. So it's been an interesting journey so far, but I think you also meet a lot of people, connect with a lot of people. So going to a lot of events, networking, conferences. The Service Design Global Conference was a great place to connect. For example, 2 years in a row I was there. So I think it's just a lot of learnings, I would say, if I can summarize in one word. And now is the point where I entertain before Sebastian.
Yeah, I got stuck on. Oh well, that happens. That's
Yes.
interesting. That's a lot of interesting shared things that you've shared. There, I'm curious. If you want to dive in now, this was something a little bit like zooming out. I read on your, I guess, bio. You were talking about this. You really talked about being like this fly on the wall, fly on the soup. I was
Yeah.
curious about your values. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a metaphor that I cannot take credit for. I remember that I saw it when I was applying for my master's at this university in Billund, Denmark. I think it's called the Design School, something like that. It's where Lego was founded, so they have this very nice program there. And I remember when they were describing service design, they had that metaphor, and I thought it was very pertinent. And then later on, I kind of integrated that into my own storytelling. But the idea is that if you're the fly in the wall, you are kind of observant, you are seeing the context around you. And if you're the fly in the soup, you are in the context, in the situation that is happening. So being both means that you acknowledge that you are inside of a cultural bubble, you're inside of your own biases, but you are also trying to take a step back and see the rest of the context around you.
Right. So just absorbing the environment and trying to navigate that. And in that case, like, let's talk a little bit about the title. Now, how does it
Mm.
relate to like designing for, like designing with, and not for?
Yeah, I think the idea generally is it's the simple principle, I think, of design that we should interact with other people, and again the human aspect, not necessarily just human. Also, I think the post-humanism is also important here. So thinking about other stakeholders that are not just humans, because we're all interconnected. And one of the ways of you being the fly in the wall, it's about connecting with other people. Because if you're just telling people or designing things directly to them without acknowledging what are their own experience, which is always going to be different, right? I like to say from time to time that two twins, even though they're identical twins, they're going to have more and more different experiences the more they grow. So me and my neighbor, we are both neighbors, but it's completely different cultural upbringing, stories, experiences, and you have to talk with those people and include them in the design process if you want to do something that is not created out of your own biases. So the designing with and not for is the idea that you include the different stakeholders that are involved in that service or in that system in order to actually create something that is meaningful to them and is not something that you're pulling out of your hat and saying this is good design, you know.
Yeah, because there's design principles. Yes, you do refer to them, but you're also like designing for someone. It has to be comfortable, or like if that was a product, it would be ergonomic. Might be the right word there, but you're designing for someone, so taking into account their preferences and how they live and how it fits into their life becomes so much important.
Yeah. And I think I emphasize it a little bit because, sure, when you're designing with, it might be a little bit of a longer process because you might have to include more people, do more interviews, more workshops. Maybe the part of the research and the involving people early on, it's a little bit more of time consuming in a way. but you end up with a much better product, a much better service. Instead of you having to band-aid it later on, you already go with something. And then, of course, it's not going to be perfect. I don't think there's a such thing as perfect, because things change over time. And even when you're doing that process, maybe something changes and that interferes. But definitely you're going to have something that's more well-rounded and more considerate of the whole cultural experience. And I think it's quite interesting, because I had a client last year that I told her, hey, I want to interview everyone in the company. And she was like, oh, even the person that works in finance that doesn't work with clients? I was like, yes, especially that person, because that's the person that most of the times is not heard, and
Hmm.
probably has a lot of insights on how things could work differently, that could improve the people that are working directly with clients, because they're so immersed, so in the soup, being the fly in the soup, with the context and the clients and everything, that sometimes they don't see those things a little bit peripherally to them.
That is so true. And in terms of like just thinking about these values, are there other values that have kind of, that have developed for you over time and it's become important? Um, I know sustainability or planet centric design is one that you
Yeah.
did mention a couple of times.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, tell me more about that.
Yeah, going a little bit on this sustainability that you meant, right? You can see that there on my title, both here but also on LinkedIn, I have humanity-centered service design, which is
Hmm.
something that I think started evolving over time. So in general, in the beginning, I would always say human-centered, because I understood that it was important to emphasize this idea of the connections between human beings and the connections and cultural learnings and all of those things. But then later on, I read a book from Don Norman that was about humanity-centered design, which was in a way, it's how to say, an alternative way to say planet-centric also. So it's similarly um, framing that concept of not talking just about the human, but also all the other non-human stakeholders that exist around the system. But for me, I think I just took it as, this is kind of something that I want to emphasize. So even saying, before I am a designer, and before I'm a service designer, I am focusing on the humanity aspect, with all the human, non-human aspects of it. And I think that's something that's also quite important, even more now when we're in a even more growing digital kind of landscape, where everything is becoming digital and everything like that, where we kind of lose the tangibility of the impacts that those digital systems have on humans, but also non-humans. So the example of the different AI chatbots, how much fresh water they consume, for example, to how do you call it, to cool the servers, or how much energy they're consuming on top of the energy. So Google, Meta, all of those big AI companies in the past years have been pushing back their sustainability goals, saying, no, no, we started using more energy now that we have AI, so we cannot reach those goals by 2030 anymore. It has to be 2025, 2045. And it's something that, when you lose that tangibility of knowing how much water you are consuming when you do one prompt on ChatGPT, you don't really see that impact that it has. And that impact is not only to people that, for example, might not have access to fresh water in the world, which still is an alarming amount of people, but also it's an impact to the amount of water that is available to the environments, to the different biomes, to all the different forests that are being burned down. And so, like, everything is interconnected. And I think it's very important that we understand in the system how we are affecting positively and negatively the different stakeholders and actors in the system.
That is so important. And I'm sure so many of us are like stressing on this point, particularly right now. From a consumerism point of view, a lot of people take advantage of the planet resources we have, but we really never think about bringing it in a more circular fashion. So I guess that would also start to touch on concepts of circular economy and how we can actually build more sustainable systems rather than just completely deplete our resources. So
Yeah.
I love the example that you shared. What was something that you worked on that was your favorite in this field?
I think I had a project. Was it? Yeah, about 1 year ago. Was on my internship that I briefly mentioned. So I did a internship with digital design studio here in Gothenburg. That's called Humblebee, and we work with NGO that's called Stadskupan, and they basically have been working already in Gothenburg for quite a while with beehives around the city. And those beehives were installed in roofs of different companies or different institutions. They had a lot with landlords because they had multiple buildings, so they could install to different buildings. And in general, it's because the bees can help improve the biodiversity of the city, right? Bees are pollinators. They also, I think, those are a little bit not that fresh to my mind, but I think it's one in every 3 bites of food that we have, it's because of bees. So they contribute a lot to the food production and everything. And when we were starting that project, they just learned something that was very interesting. That is also the bees, when they um, go to forage, they travel about 3 to 5 kilometers from the beehive, which is already impressive on itself. But they, when they're collecting the pollen, they collect a lot of little microscopic specks of different things. And if you get that pollen when they come back to the beehive and you analyze the DNA of that, you can understand information about heavy metals, about pollutants, about a lot of information, I say environmental information on the health of that biome in that 3 to 5 kilometer radius. So I thought was such an interesting concept, and they really wanted to understand how can we make that in a way that our clients can actually have that actionable data. So not only have it as something that is cool, but something that can actually help them understand how they are improving, other ways to improve, then connecting maybe to local agents that can help improve more that specific area of the city. And it's even cool to see, and I think that's also a nice example because they actually just launched last week for the public the first beta. So during the internship, that was like 5 months. We didn't have the time to fully organize it, but they really, really liked the project. So they kept working with Humblebee and another developer, and now they're actually launching it to be a full-fledged service, so people can actually have access to that information.
Oh wow, that's incredible! You just promoted that. That's awesome. What was it like working with them? And I guess it was this the first kind of project that you did in Sweden that was more with a corporate. What was that like?
I had a couple of projects before that, but I think it was quite interesting because that was the no, that wasn't the first that I had with an NGO, but it was the first that it was more involved, that it was actually a service design project. So really working on a new offering, a different kind of market, understanding what were the different ways to differentiate maybe from competitors that exist or even collaborate with them, because in the end it's all about community and building it together. So it was quite interesting, for example, when we reached to technically kind of a competitor in that, they're like, oh, no, no, let's collab because we want you to grow to Sweden and then you can be the place that helps. So it's an interesting different landscape, I think, also when we're working with NGOs, because they're less competitive in the sense that when you work with companies, they're so much like, oh, I have to be better than you. And when you're working with companies that are more focused on the social or sustainability aspect, they're more, oh, we can work together to improve or better to both of us. Then we kind of push it forward. So and as I mentioned, they were quite open to just explore and do different workshops. So me and my team, we played a little bit around with different futures thinking and different structures on the workshops, and definitely was something that they were also kind of, even for example, I remember one of the first workshops we did a stakeholder map, and they're like, yeah, we knew all of those things, but seeing it, visualizing, having something tangible to look at makes it much more easy to be actionable, right? So in general, I think it was a great project to have, just because it was at the same time bound, but also open to possibilities. So we could experiment, play around, and we also managed to deliver something that was nice enough for them to be happy to continue working on.
True. Um, I am curious about so many things. So first, let us go one by one. The first one is definitely your experience of using foresight strategy and design into it. Because as a foresight strategist myself, I'm always curious about the case studies of that. And the
Mm.
second thing that you mentioned is like including of play. So what does that look like? Maybe you touched a little on it, and I know you are always someone who values like play and bringing together logic and design together to really create engaging, fun experiences. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about those two things.
Yeah, I think both kind of tie together to what I actually did on my master thesis, because on the master thesis, I worked with the topic of stigma of hearing loss,
Hmm.
using design fictions, which is a part of speculative design, to problematize that stigma. So it was this combination of having a very important social topic, which is in this case the stigma of hearing loss, but it could be sustainability in the water crisis. It could be like other different kind of what we call wicked problems. So are these problems that are so complex, have so many layers of complexity that they're quite hard to kind of figure it out with just one thing. It's not like there's no one solution solves that whole wicked problem, right? And on the other side, design fictions are this kind of stories of the near future, or these ideas of creating artifacts generally that are a piece of conversation in a way, right? So one example that I like to use, which is from the um, service, no, the Future Design Laboratory, I think it's called, which were the ones that started the design fictions. They created this very realistic cereal box, but it was made out of crickets, the cereal, and there was like a cricket design in the front and everything, talking a little bit about the food crisis and alternative protein sources. And crickets or insects on the westernized world it are a little bit kind of not well looked at, but they're also technically very good sources of protein. So it's just about using this artifact that you're so used to having in um, in day to day, which is a cereal box. Most people have seen a cereal box or have eaten from one growing up, but using that as a way to talk about it. And when I was doing the thesis, it was this idea of using different artifacts around hearing loss to make it easier to talk about the topic. And I even remember I had this one colleague that went to the workshop, and before I managed to get him to the workshop, he was like, I don't think there's any stigma. Everybody talks about hearing loss like it's normal, right? And after he did the workshop, I remember he kind of came to me and said, oh, now I realize what you mean. So he was quite defensive from the beginning, and kind of, I know what I know. And those artifacts kind of open it up a little bit to him. And I think I actually have them here in my drawer. So one of the artifacts that I did seven, but this was one of them. So it's here where. So it's going to talk a little bit about, for
I love
example,
it. I love that you have it right there.
yeah, it's there because I haven't organized that that drawer yet. But anyway, but it's playing with the topic of eyewear. So glasses, as you're wearing right now, for the longest time were also a topic of stigma. People were telling people that they were four eyes or whatever. At least in Brazil, we would do that. And nowadays, you have a lot of companies like Tom Ford that they have eyewear, so it became a fashion symbol. Some people
Mm,
nowadays even use glasses that don't have lenses or have, let's say, don't have prescription glasses, just for the aspect of being fashionable and everything, right?
sure.
So I try to problematize that with the hearing aids, because one of the things with hearing aids in the stigma was vanity. And what if uh, the hearing aids were actually fashion statements and not medical devices, right? Because there is this trend with hearing aids of making them smaller and smaller, so you don't actually see that they are there. But you also end up losing battery life. You end up losing sometimes the quality of the mic. So you're kind of losing the functionality of it purely to make it look less visible. So what if instead it was more visible and it would be more fashion oriented? So this is one kind of way that I try to problematize about it, and I think it's also an example of design fictions and future thinking a little bit as a way to talk about problems that are sometimes quite hard to figure out where to even start to talk about.
Yeah, that is very interesting. That was an interesting word for it that my professor actually used to tell us. It was about, I'm trying to remember, prototypes is what he would call it. So, prototype is like provoking people to have conversations by bringing them these artifacts that help them kind of open like a window into the future, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think that really resonated with me.
Yeah, I think it's again like two words for a simpler fake, right? Similar to when I was talking about humanity centered and planet centered prototypes and design fictions. And I think that's also an interesting reflection that I had with a lot of conversations on the community voices. Was a lot of times we really focus on the terms, on,
Hmm,
oh, service design versus product designer versus UX versus things. Does it really matter in the end? What matters is that if we manage to have the conversation, if we manage to talk about it, if we manage to do the job, in the end, those kind of labels are there more to structure hierarchies and stuff like that, that in the end don't really matter much.
true. That also makes me think you come from the engineering world. So, what was it like to have that transition? And now that you have had that transition to design, and you were talking about how we label things, and it's not necessary to do that. Like, how can other disciplines, like maybe engineering, business, understand futures and service design better, because sometimes it's very abstract in the way that is framed for them.
Yeah, I think it's hard because it's quite intangible, right?
Mm.
Service, whenever I'm explaining what service design is to people, because every time I say, oh, I work with service design, I see on their head like, like this moment of loading, and I have no idea what that is. So I have to explain. It's hard, I think, without an example, because it's so intangible, experiences, behaviors, and things like that. So kind of setting a example that they might understand, if maybe they are tuned with how hospitals work, or maybe how the tax agencies work, or post offices, things like that. But one thing that I wanted to clarify also is that a lot of times it's funny that I say I went from engineering to design, and some people are like, oh, that's such a big leap. At least in my brain, it wasn't that much, because on engineering I was or electrical engineer, I was thinking about working with home automation, which is already kind of this more human aspect of engineering, because sure, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of programming and this kind of logic parts, but you really have to understand behaviors to make home automation smart. So I was always this kind of person talking that I have smart lights, not because I'm going to make my whole room purple out of a sudden, but I have them because they actually go through the circadian rhythm throughout the day. So they start quite white and bright and lower over time to more warm tone, which in Sweden, for example, when sometimes we get to the point where the sun sets at 3 in the afternoon, it helps a little bit to fix this kind of discrepancies in your brain understanding how late it is. So you have to understand human behavior and how people work and walk and interact in the house that they live in to be able to do home automation. And that, of course, the technology is here and then the human behavior is here. I think what I did when I moved to design was just this. So I'm like focusing
Yeah,
on the
like
human
flip
behavior
it.
and problematizing the technology and understanding how that can help us. I'm still a tech geek. I'm still somebody that loves technology, but instead of focusing on that, I'm focusing first on the behavior and then understanding how we can use technology to improve our lives.
True. Like I went through a similar transition, and I love the example that you use because it actually is super tangible for people to understand. Because, like, yes, there is motion sensing and things like that, but for me, I was like, even as a computer science engineer, I did right. Like, I was like, oh, these user stories are coming, but are these actually the things that people are using? So I had to like go back and verify each step and then redesign maybe whatever system that we were looking at. And I did the same when I made the transition. So a lot of people are like, hey, that is like one in a million cases. No, it doesn't happen. But no, we're actually taking like, we're essentially trying to understand group behavior and translating it into language, then we can make either products, services, or experiences for. What has been challenging for you, and you've really found it interesting to navigate?
Hmm, that's a good question. It's a very open question. Wait,
Felipe
give me
is
a
like,
sec.
I don't have any challenges. I just
No, no, I
solve.
have too many challenges. I'm just trying to think. Uh, I think one of the biggest challenges, as I was saying, this past year was really trying to find clients, right? And I think that could be an interesting example because prospecting on a way goes a lot to sales. So I was trying to read a little bit about sales, how to be a salesman and things like that. And it was interesting because there's so many ramifications on understanding. There's, for example, emailing sequencing. So when you send a message first, most likely that gets buried on all the other messages that they get on email or LinkedIn. So you might as well have a little sequence that every couple of days you maybe ping and then you go back and you're trying to relate to what they're doing and everything. So creating points in time or touch points that you're having with that client, which has a lot of interface with how designing services work. So you can also think that on a service blueprint or a customer journey, like the before, after, during, and everything, but in a way that's more specific to the kind of converting that into a sale. So I think that was just interesting as a way to bridge those two areas, sales and design, and understanding how I can use one knowledge from that one to this one and that one to this one, and just exploring it. And I think it's also, I haven't found the secret recipe to get a client at all. I don't think that's the point that I'm trying to make, but it's just experimenting, trying different things, understanding how to explain to different stakeholders what service design is, how can you package it when you're sending a proposal so they are less confused about what you're trying to offer, without being too long and things like that, right? So it's this very optimized in between space that you have to find for each client when you're talking with them. That I think it also converts to job seeking. It's the same thing with CVs and portfolios. When you're doing a CV, you also have to kind of find this balance where you're putting everything that you learned the past 20 something years or more and telling them like, hey, this is something that you have to be interested in. So it was just bridging from when I was a job seeker to now a solo entrepreneur, how those learnings bridge, but also some of them don't, and what are the parts that I have to kind of fill the gaps with other learnings from other disciplines, right? So the interdisciplinary nature of design is quite already well thought of and everything, but it's quite interesting when you bridge to another discipline you haven't done so far and understanding all the different ideas and knowledges and everything that you can get from there.
True. And I think you've started to move into more of the leadership area. Like, hey, you have to get people on board and get people to agree. I think so many of us actually resonate with what you're coming through, be it pitching to your clients or like just getting all your stakeholders to be on board with your solution. I think it's so important to have that skill set. So Felipe, by the end of this year, you're gonna be a sales expert. We know that now. Okay,
We'll see,
perfect.
we'll see, we'll see.
Amazing. Um, I'm curious, like from a leadership point of view and design leadership, I guess since we're talking about that, um, what are qualities you think that design leaders should have, or like they've inspired you? Because you've had so many conversations over last year, 1.5 or 2 years almost. So, what has that been like, and what are some of the things that really stood out for you? And that's probably very specific. You can go more broad and be like, "Here, I learned so many things." You'll probably end up writing an entire book, but that's different. So,
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we're talking about, the cultural differences and how every person has a different living experience and how to acknowledge that as a way to have a superpower, right? So the superpower there is really the people that you're involving in the process as a leader or as a workshop host or as somebody that's starting community building or something like that. In the end, the thing that's going to make it or break it is the people. So being empathetic about how they can help and also how you can help them, doing like two-sided street, right, or two-way street where things are coming and things are going, and just understanding that everyone, it's in different points in life and in different experiences, and everyone can contribute in a different way. And people are also going to be very, a lot of times, self-conscious about it and maybe be a bit more defensive. So going back to, sorry, the example of that my friend that I mentioned before the workshop, he was really like, okay, I come into the workshop, but I don't think there's any stigma. So he, for different reasons that I actually don't know, was quite defensive on this idea of like there isn't, but he was still open to come. And I think in general it's just this openness to listen, to be heard, and to kind of involve everyone together. That for me is the biggest learning there is, because sure, one mind can think well, two can think better, three plus can think a lot more, so that's always good.
that's incredible, and that is so true. Um, this and has community, like being a part of SDN community, kind of changed that notion in any way or added to that?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I omitted that part on the little story, right? But I found SDN actually through a colleague in the masters. She was 1 year above me. They meant it. She's living there now in Stockholm. And they tried to, her and a friend, they tried to be volunteers in the Copenhagen conference. And they told me about it. I was like, what is that? I have no idea what that is, even though I want to do service design masters. I was already a couple of weeks in there. They were the ones that told me about it. And I tried volunteering for the first conferences. I actually managed to get a volunteership position in Berlin. That's where I met Judy and the team. And I think it was interesting just in this position of being somebody that just kind of learned about service design a couple of years past, and just talking with people and connecting with people that basically founded what's the idea of service design, being Birgit, our president in the SDN, or Stefan Homley, that was my coordinator in Lean Shopping, but also part of creating the SDN in the early 2000s. I think it's just interesting how also this discipline that we all love kind of evolved with those different people and how they connected and how they're still connecting, and how us as young designers, people, or emergent designers, I would say, people that are starting in service design, can also contribute to kind of add to what they have learning and what we have learning and what we have as a living experience. So it's just this very interesting community where you have so many people from all over the world and so many open people also. I think that's one thing that I learned from doing the community voices. So many people were so open to take 30 minutes of their day to just talk, you know.
Yeah.
So I think it's just an amazing amount of people, and I can't emphasize more of saying, if you see somebody somewhere, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever conference, talk with them. Everybody that I met so far in the service design community, they always been so open to just talk, and it doesn't matter if they're the president of a very big design studio or they are just graduating. Everyone has been so open. So just talk and learn.
That is so true. I was going to ask you actually next, like, what is a piece of advice? But there you have it. All you storytellers and pro, like, reach out to people. Don't be scared. People will take the time to share their experience with you, and that
Yeah,
will put you ahead of so many people in your learning curve. Just ask the question and reach out.
exactly.
All right. I see. Let us check a few of the questions here. All right. I think people are just taking in all that amazing insight that you have shared. So I do have a question for us to get started as people are
Yeah.
typing in. What is something that you're most excited about in 2026? Be it service design, personal, whatever it might be.
I think it's connected both personally and professionally is to travel. I think the past
Travel.
couple of years that I lived in Sweden, because it's quite an expensive country and I was moving from a cheaper country that was Portugal, I couldn't do it so much. So every little bit of money that I managed to make more, I'm trying to save to travel. Because I think when you travel and you experience different cultures, when you're there learning history, culture, places, just it just opens your brain to different possibilities, both personally and professionally. So I think this year I'm very much looking forward to that.
That's incredible. Are we gonna see digital nomad pay this year in that case?
No, I wouldn't go that far. I think it's comfortable to be in one place for a longer period of time, but I do like to go around a little bit. Yes.
All right, perfect. With that, we're coming to an actual end of our conversation today. Thank you, Felipe, for taking the time. You've taken a whole huge amount of time and actually had these conversations with so many people. So appreciate you being on the other side and sharing your story with us. I'm sure everyone is super excited to get to know you more. And they will be reaching out with a lot of questions, I'm telling you. All right.
So much. I think it's just to say before we leave that we had I think almost 60 other conversations before this one, and we all have them on this YouTube playlist. So I think it's just amazing people that came before me and set the stage for this. So I couldn't recommend more to just go there and listen to the other ones.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Felipe. And
Thank
I'll
you.
see you on the side. Bye.
Yes. Bye.
Great. Okay, with that, thank you, everyone. Firstly, we really appreciate your support. So I have a little bit of a gift for you, which is in the comment section. I've added a discount code for SDPC, which is a Service Design Practitioners Curriculum. The course starts from SDN, by SDN Academy tomorrow, 6th February. We have only 2 seats left, so if you want to join and learn more about service design, grab that code and grab your seat for tomorrow's session. All right. We are actually transitioning Community Voices to a more bi weekly episode. So we will be seeing you on 19th of Feb, Thursday, again for our next episode. And in the meantime, do like, share, subscribe to all the SDN social media that we have from LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, wherever you're engaging with us. And thank you once again for all your support and